Charleston, South Carolina. A day heavy with tension and uncertainty. The streets around Marion Square had become the epicenter of a protest. From early morning, people gathered, clutching large signs with bold slogans scrawled across them. "Truth for all of us," read one. "Fight against privilege," declared another. Not all the anger was directed at Barron Trump. He had unintentionally become a symbol of deeper frustrations with his family and everything they represented. This protest was like a storm crashing down on an 18-year-old young man. Event organizers had taken precautions. Barricades were erected, and security personnel and police officers in reflective vests lined the area. Yet despite these measures, the crowd radiated an air of defiance. As the family's gleaming limousine approached the hotel, the crowd erupted. "Shame! Shame!" they chanted in unison, their voices crashing like waves against the vehicle. Angry glares and deafening shouts all focused on the car, as though it embodied every injustice they had endured. Barron stepped out, shielded by a tight security detail. Dressed in a modest gray suit, his youthful face carried an unexpected calmness. His tall frame and confident stride momentarily became the center of attention. But he didn't glance back at the crowd, walking briskly into the hotel. The chants grew louder, like a storm reaching its peak. Even after Barron entered the building, the crowd's fury didn't subside. Their voices rose higher, as if long-suppressed emotions were finally bursting free. A woman held up a sign, her hands trembling with emotion. "We can't stay silent any longer." The atmosphere grew increasingly tense, like a string pulled taut to the brink of snapping. Security personnel began moving cautiously. Their eyes scanned the crowd, their radios buzzing with hushed exchanges. One officer, standing by the barricades, watched every movement with clenched hands, bracing for an outbreak at any moment. While some protesters shouted harsher slogans, others began feeling that things were spiraling out of control. "We're here to remind them, not to spark a confrontation," said an older man among the demonstrators. But his words were drowned out by the surrounding cries of outrage. Rational voices were lost in the storm of anger. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Then out of nowhere, a young woman, barely in her 20s, broke down in tears. "I just want justice," she cried, her voice choking with emotion. But instead of calming the crowd, her plea fueled the fire. Those around her shouted even louder, their collective anger and helplessness surging through the square like an unstoppable wave. At the height of the chaos, an unexpected sound pierced through the cacophony. From a distance came a deep rumble, faint at first like a far-off echo. The crowd paused, their heads turning toward the source. From a narrow street near King Street, the sound of engines grew louder, like the steady approach of a gathering storm. At first it was hard to discern, but as it grew closer, it became clear. Motorcycles. The bikers emerged one by one, on polished machines that gleamed under the midday sun. Small American flags fluttered from their bikes, catching the light. Clad in black leather jackets and helmets, with some wearing dark sunglasses, the riders exuded an air of mystery and quiet menace. They moved steadily, like an army advancing into contested territory. The sight was both surreal and commanding, a silent force cutting through the chaos of the square. The crowd watched in a mixture of awe and unease as the bikers made their slow, deliberate approach. It was a moment of stillness before whatever was about to unfold. The protest began to shift as the crowd turned its attention to the group of bikers, speculating whether they had come to escalate the situation or for some other purpose entirely. A mood of anticipation hung in the air, like the curtain about to rise on the second act of a tense play. A woman standing near the barricade murmured, "Who are they? What do they want here?" A man nearby responded, "I don't know, but they don't look friendly." The bikers halted at the end of the street, their engines rumbling as if daring the already tense atmosphere to react. All eyes in the crowd were drawn to them, while security personnel hesitated, unsure of how to handle the unexpected turn of events. Nobody knew what would happen next, but everyone felt that the coming moments could redefine the day's course. As the engines finally quieted, the leader of the bikers dismounted from the front motorcycle. He was a middle-aged man with streaks of silver in his hair and a face deeply etched with the lines of time. His leather jacket bore the insignia of a local biker club, a bold image of an eagle with outstretched wings embracing the American flag. Removing his helmet, he revealed steady, resolute eyes, the kind that suggested he was no stranger to tense situations. The crowd fell silent almost instantly. The shouting and chants evaporated, replaced by murmured speculation. One man's voice broke the uneasy quiet, asking, "What are they going to do? Whose side are they on?" The biker leader took a few steps forward, stopping just before the barricade. With a calm but commanding voice, he addressed the crowd. "We're not here to cause trouble. We're here to remind everyone that there's another way to resolve conflict." His words swept through the crowd like a cool breeze cutting through the oppressive tension. A few people lowered their signs as if reflecting on what he just said, but not everyone was convinced. A woman near the front shouted angrily, "Do you really think those words will change anything?" "We're here fighting for justice, not to listen to empty platitudes." The biker leader didn't respond immediately. He stood silently, his steady gaze resting on the woman as though carefully considering his next words. Then, in a deliberate tone, he replied, "Fighting for justice is admirable, but the way you're doing it is only driving people further apart. If we keep shouting and blaming, does anything really change?" His question brought another wave of silence. This time it was deeper, heavier. From the back of the crowd, an older man spoke up, his voice carrying over the quiet. "He's right. I'm no fan of the Trump family either, but yelling at that young man isn't going to solve anything." His words seemed to ripple through the crowd. Some nodded in reluctant agreement, while others stood quietly, their earlier anger now tempered with a hint of introspection. The energy of the protest began to shift again, this time toward an uncertain but pivotal moment of choice. The tension in the air began to ease, though skepticism lingered. The bikers formed a line, creating a human barrier between the crowd and the hotel, not to confront, but to maintain peace. This gesture caused many in the crowd to rethink their stance. People exchanged glances, hesitation evident in their eyes. Some slowly lowered their signs, while others held on but refrained from shouting. A young man, perhaps in his early 20s, stepped forward and addressed the biker leader. "Why are you doing this? You're not with us, and you're not with them. So what do you stand for?" The older man offered a gentle smile before replying, "We stand for the hope that people can find common ground, even when they disagree. We're not here to take sides. We're here to remind everyone there's a better way." His words seemed to touch something within the crowd. The young woman who had cried earlier approached him hesitantly and spoke softly. "Maybe you're right. Yelling hasn't made me feel any better. I just want to be heard." The man nodded, his eyes full of understanding. "Everyone wants to be heard, but for that to happen, we also need to learn how to listen to others." This brief exchange opened a new door. The crowd, once boiling with emotion, began to settle. Protesters and bikers, two groups that seemed so opposed, now stood closer, not through force, but through understanding. The atmosphere grew calmer, but all eyes remained fixed on the bikers. A middle-aged man from the crowd, dressed plainly in a worn shirt, stepped forward. "I don't hate them," he said, gesturing toward the hotel. "But do you really think a few words will change anything? Our lives won't get any better. They'll still live in their mansions while we struggle to survive every single day." The biker leader nodded, his expression deeply empathetic. "I get it," he said. "We're not here to dismiss your pain, but I've lived long enough to know that real change doesn't come from blaming or hating. It starts with small actions, with understanding each other." An older woman near the front of the crowd raised her voice, heavy with emotion. "I lost my son because of an unjust system, and now all I want is justice. None of them," she said, pointing toward the hotel, "can understand my pain." The biker leader stepped closer to her, his gaze somber and respectful. "I can't pretend to understand your pain," he said softly, "but I can tell you this. I'm here to listen, to remind you that even though we're different, your pain is valid, and how we face that pain will determine what happens next." His words carried a quiet strength, like a gentle breeze passing through the heavy air. The woman stood silent, her eyes welling with tears. Around her, the crowd began to feel the shift. The anger that had once consumed them gave way to a mix of sorrow and hope, leaving the square filled with a new, unexpected emotion. Barron Trump unexpectedly appeared at the hotel steps, his presence silencing the crowd instantly. No security guards stood close by, just a young man facing the angry crowd. He descended a few steps, his voice calm but full of emotion. I can't change how you feel about me or my family, but I'm not here today to defend myself. I'm here to help children who have nothing. If any of you are willing, I want to hear your stories. I want to understand. The sincerity in his voice caught the crowd off guard. A young woman holding a protest sign lowered it, her eyes fixed on him. A young man nearby whispered, "Maybe he's not what I thought." The square was now enveloped by a strange new feeling. Connection. Fragile but genuine. Barron stood there, facing the scrutinizing, angry, and bewildered gazes of the crowd. He continued, his tone steady but heartfelt. I can't pretend to understand all the hardships you've been through, but I believe our being here today is an opportunity to listen to one another, to recognize that despite our differences, we all want a better future. From the crowd, a young woman stepped forward, still clutching her sign, though her grip had loosened. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Do you really think your family cares about people like us?" Barron paused, meeting her gaze directly. I can't speak for my family, he said, but I can speak for myself. I'm here because I believe everyone deserves a chance to be heard and supported. That's why I joined this charity initiative. Not for recognition, but because I believe small acts can change lives. A middle-aged man shouted from the back, his voice filled with both anger and despair. Small acts don't help when we don't have jobs or enough to eat. The biker leader standing nearby turned to the man and responded, You're right, but small acts can lead to bigger changes. We're not here to defend anyone. We're here to remind people that we can start with the smallest steps. If you want change, it begins with opening up and seeking solutions instead of clinging to hatred. His words silenced the man. The crowd grew quieter, with murmurs replacing the earlier shouts. Barron took a deep breath and continued, I know that what I say today might not change anyone's mind right away, but if we can leave here with a better understanding of one another, then today won't have been wasted. An older woman standing near the barricade nodded slowly. Maybe you're right, she said, her voice gentle yet resolute. We need to learn to listen before we can change anything. Her words resonated, rippling through the crowd. The square, once charged with anger, began to feel different. It wasn't resolution, but it was a start, a fragile moment of hope. The elderly woman's agreement spread like a small flame, igniting others. More people in the crowd began nodding, lowering their signs. A strange sense of peace enveloped the square, as though everyone suddenly realized they had just witnessed something far greater than their disagreements. Barron stood firmly, his eyes reflecting sincerity and determination. His words were not just a plea for listening, but a call to action, a call for unity. The crowd, once consumed by anger, was now quieter than ever. Every gaze remained fixed on Barron, awaiting his next words. From the back of the crowd, a middle-aged man stepped forward. Dressed in a faded shirt, his calloused hands tightly gripped a sign that read, Justice for All. His voice was deep and resonant. I've heard empty promises from people in power my whole life. But you're different. I can see you truly want to understand us. But is that enough? Barron bowed his head slightly, his eyes carrying an emotional weight. No, he said softly. I'm not enough on my own. But if each of us is willing to listen, act, and change, the impact we can make together is greater than we realize. We don't have to agree on everything, but we can build a new foundation based on respect and understanding. His words cut through the somber atmosphere like a beam of light. A young woman, the one who had cried earlier, placed her hand over her chest as though to steady herself. She looked at Barron and whispered, Maybe I was wrong to direct my anger at you. You didn't deserve that. The biker leader, still standing near his motorcycle, stepped forward. His voice was strong but filled with warmth. What we've witnessed here today is more than a protest or a conflict. It's a chance to remind ourselves that no matter how different we may seem, we all share one common dream, a better life for ourselves and the people we love. His words seemed to resonate deeply within the crowd. People holding signs began placing them on the ground. An older man, his eyes brimming with tears, reached out to hold the hand of the person next to him. He whispered, Maybe it's time we try a different approach. Seeing this change, Barron took a deep breath and smiled gently. I'm not asking for forgiveness or for anyone to forget the pain, but if we can begin with dialogue instead of confrontation, I believe we can go further together. The square, once a battleground of voices and anger, now felt transformed. It wasn't just a resolution, it was a moment of understanding, fragile but real, and a hopeful step towards something better. An elderly woman slowly stepped forward, her eyes a mix of sternness and deep compassion. She spoke with a steady voice. We've endured so much pain and loss. Perhaps, as you said, it's time for us to learn how to forgive and focus on finding solutions rather than dwelling on mistakes. The atmosphere in the square shifted completely. The shouts had faded, replaced by softer voices, thoughtful exchanges. Some people even began to smile, their gazes toward one another filled with empathy rather than hostility. The bikers, now a symbol of protection and unity, stood quietly in a circle, not imposing, not interfering, but creating a safe space for everyone. Barron, standing at the center of it all, felt that today had been more than a lesson for the crowd. It had been a profound learning experience for himself. As the golden rays of the setting sun bathed the square, a voice from the back broke the tranquil silence. Today, we didn't just learn to listen to others, we learned to listen to ourselves. It was the middle-aged man who had shouted angrily at Barron earlier. Now his face was calm, his eyes reflecting newfound kindness. The entire square seemed to pause in an extraordinary moment of peace. People who had been adversaries stood side by side, no longer enemies but companions on a shared journey toward understanding and unity. That day in Marion Square, no one could have predicted that a tense protest would end in understanding and solidarity. Barron, the bikers, and the crowd showed that no matter how different we are, people can listen and find common ground. Small actions, sincere intentions, and the courage to face disagreements head-on created a moment worth remembering. This story isn't just about Barron or the protesters, it's about all of us. In life, we can often get caught up in negativity, conflicts, and misunderstandings. But if we take a step back, set aside judgment, and open our hearts to truly listen, even the greatest barriers can be overcome. What do you think about today's story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a moment where understanding helped resolve a conflict? We'd love to hear your story. If you found this story meaningful, share it with your friends and family to spread the message of unity and empathy. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss more inspiring stories. Thank you for joining us, your place for sharing unforgettable moments and valuable life lessons.